Okay, hi everyone, welcome back. Today we have another game analysis. This is my second round game from the spring tournament here, 2025. So it's my second OTB game in about a decade or so. This kind of the luck of the draw. It's a Swiss tournament. In the first round, I played the highest rated player, and now in this round, I am playing the lowest rated player. So this one had a bit of a skill gap, you could say. At the same time, I still think there's quite a bit that I have learned from this game, especially doing the analysis afterwards. I was really surprised about some of the things the computer said. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through the game first. I'm going to share my thoughts during the critical moments, and then we're going to look back and we're going to actually see, well, what I've learned, where some of my thoughts were incorrect or at least incomplete. So I opened up with e4. Opponent ended up playing d6, d4, and then knight goes to d7. So here we are, move 2 out of book. I don't think I have ever seen this before outside of like random bullet games. It looks very similar to one of those Philidors where, something like this, where knight d7 is going to come next, or even knight d7 here. This is like the black lion or the risky lion or something like that. But this is knight d7 first. I ended up, after a small thing, just playing knight c3, e5, knight f3, and there we go. We actually get the Philidor position. Then after bishop c4, h6, already I was thinking my opponent is going to do that black lion plan. Black will want to play g5, bishop here, reroute the knight to eventually get to this square, and then try and attack my king. And that's kind of an annoying plan, but I've also known I've played several games against computers, training games, or to understand this position better. And the plan with the g5 and stuff, it doesn't work very well unless white plays h3. If white plays h3, then the knight can sacrifice here, then g4, g5 has a target. But without h3, it isn't a problem. So I said, okay, I can castle. I'll just make sure I don't play h3 as long as that plan is there. Bishop e7. And now here, again, as far as I know, the main plan is to play somewhere on the queen side. Just as an aside, like these Philidor positions, I actually think they're really, really interesting in that I think it's one of those positions where a stronger player can outplay a weaker player in all sorts of types of positions because the way they work, like black is annoyingly solid, and white will often get that, zero point 0.5 advantage, says the computer. Maybe it's even 0.8, but it's really hard to do anything afterwards. Um, and it's really easy, in my experience, to overextend. So I might actually start playing something like this as black, just to understand it more. Anyway, I ended up playing a4. I'm expanding on the queen side. I know the plan is generally to play a5. I just get these pawns, because you can imagine if these pawns were to get exchanged, all of a sudden I know what I'm doing. I'm going to be powering down on the queen side. Generally a useful move. And then my opponent, first move that really surprised me, b6. So c6 is standard, a5 to just stop the pawn in its tracks. That is standard. But b6, all right, let's just keep going forward. a5, and are you going to play bishop goes to b7? Because if you ever play bishop goes to b7, well, I'm going to have to protect this pawn, maybe rook you, and then I'm going to want to push in with a6 and just make that bishop look really, really silly. And again, just take all the space on the queen side. That was the idea. But we didn't get that. Opponent played c5. Wow. I had a decently long think here. What do you do? There's no real way to keep the pawn on d4. And then I'm realizing, the more that I'm thinking, is that if I can push d5, I'm going to get that permanent space advantage, which is nice. And I think what really makes this great is that this pawn is here. If we were to back up, if we could imagine that I played d5 here, this seems like a not very good move because now the knight always has the c5 square. He can play a5 to stop my b4 push, and the knight just lives there. Once the pawn is there, now this knight has no real future, it has no real home. And black is extraordinarily cramped. And it's from this point forward, my opponent never solves the space problem. She tries, but doesn't come close. She castles, which is Big relief for me. There's going to be no kingside attack in the future. So I play queen e2, just denying my piece. a6. I'm not really happy with this move. Clearly wants to play b5. I'm just going to take it. And then after the take, well, I now have a super big target here, and I already have three pieces targeting it. She has three defenders, but still, I had a target. If we were to back up, before this decision, I've got like vague plans. I'm going to be playing queenside-ish. Clear target now. Makes me really happy. I played h3 more out of I know I just said at the beginning, and I was thinking this the game, that I didn't want to play h3 as long as the Black Lion plan was there. But now I'm not worried about the Black Lion plan, and so I played h3, and the idea wasn't, just to play h3. Okay, that's not true. Part of it was I knew that I was probably the stronger player. I mean, I got a provisional rating, so who knows like what my overboard rating actually is. But fairly certain that I'm the stronger player and that I would be able to outplay her, slash, the longer the game goes on, the more mistakes there are. So it's your turn, black, make a move, maybe it'll be a mistake. And it probably was a mistake, she played queen before. But anyway, just also, my idea is I want to get this bishop developed so that way I can then double rooks over here on the a file. But I don't really have a good square for this bishop. If I were to bring it to e3, it's always running into knight goes to g4, just hitting the bishop. And again, I've got such a big space advantage, I don't want to entertain any of those exchanges. Bishop d2 makes more sense. And in fact, the bishop looks really, really nice here because it eventually wants to come over here to a5. But I also know that in these sorts of structures, this knight wants to reroute over to c4, and it's going to go there through the d2 square. And so I want to keep d2 open. So this was my plan. I'm going to play h3, so I can play bishop e3 without running into knight goes to g4. That keeps d2 free, so my knight can eventually go here, or maybe, here, something like that. And once the bishop moves critically, that's going to let me double rooks, attacking the only real weakness in this position. That's the plan. Let's see here. Opponent ended up playing queen goes to b4, and then she seemed really surprised when I just played rook a4 and she went straight back. So this is a move that she just missed. The idea seems to be she wanted to play knight goes to b6 next, hit the bishop, and if my bishop moves, all of a sudden there's two things hitting the e4 square. Let's just actually maybe put like a fantasy. Even here, this is kind of silly. If I were to do nothing, for example, tax the bishop, if I were to move back, I don't know if that's very good. Um, yeah, sure. Let's even, that's bad, right? Sorry. And then if I were to move like the bishop over here, all of a sudden, uh, annoying pressure. So something like that, I guess. But again, rook a4 just completely stops all of that. Queen moves right back. I continue with my plan. Bishop goes to e3. Maybe. I've got some b4 ideas because of the pin. She doesn't like that, and so she retreats the queen, which is really, capitulation. Uh, there's a pawn here. It's poisoned, but you can take it. Um, but just moving the queen, that lets me snag the pawn, right? So take. She does place knight b6, and then I retreat the rook all the way back. This is an interesting decision. I was debating what I wanted to do here. Where did I want to move the rook? Ideally, I was thinking rook goes to a2. Just that way it's really easy to double rooks. But there's this annoyingness here because if I were to move my bishop, there'll be a trade of rooks, the knight has to move, and then the e4 pawn is probably going to drop. And so I'd have to be really, really, maybe I have to move the bishop back to d3, but then maybe I run into c4, even if it's just an exchange. Again, I'm losing the pawn. It just seemed a little bit messy. And so again, I'm the higher rated player. If I just keep things safe, let's play rook a1. Everything is connected. There's no more worries about this knight being chased away, or even take, and then trying to take. There's nothing there. In retrospect, I realized like 30 seconds after I made the move, rook a3 is probably even better. Just because, let's just give like a nothing move, just do something like this. Because now if there's ever an exchange of rooks, I get the passed a pawn. Rook goes behind it. It shoots up the board very, very quickly. So, but at the same time, I'm not going to, begrudge this move too much. Everything's protected. Opponent finishes development. Bishop goes to d7. Now, again, I keep going with my plan, and this is an absolutely wonderful move. Again, it's reinforcing e4. Everything is super happy. And at this point, I feel as if, what is my opponent going to do? Let's put it that way. I think this is an extremely hard position for just anybody to play. Okay, you're down a pawn, but you're down space. You've got no real targets. What are your next moves? Meanwhile, again, I'm going to double rooks. I'm going to bring my knight. Okay, not there we go. That's better. Maybe I'll bring the knight here or here. Reroute the bishops. Maybe even eventually think about playing f4 or g4. Expand the king. So I can do anything. Very hard for black to make a move. And black basically self-destructs here by playing g5, which I think is perfectly understandable. Again, it's really hard to do anything, so, well, already down a pawn, you're against probably a stronger player. If you're just going to sit there, it's going to be a terrible game. So let's at least, light the board on fire. Maybe we can get g5 and h5, try and open some files, and maybe get an attack going. Makes some sense. At least the idea makes sense. The move, unfortunately, is really, really weakening, and black has no real way of getting any attack going. Like if you give black four free moves, what are you going to do? Even something like this, sorry, this, like there's still no open lines yet. The queen is really far from the action, and I've got ample defenders nearby. So more of a hope thing than anything. Anyway, computer says I found the best move, so I'm pretty happy with this. I ended up playing bishop goes to b5. With the idea, it was relatively simple. He's got all the pawns. Sorry, she has all the pawns on the dark squares, which means that these, squares, they're all really, really weak. And if I can exchange the light squared bishop, my knights are going to live there. Really, really happy. So I offer the exchange, and then she plays h5, just in for a penny, in for a pound. Okay, do we take the pawn? I took the pawn. I had to calculate because there's, of course, the really common tactic. Knight takes d5 with the idea the knight comes back, black's won a pawn. Okay. But I think I can get away with this because if knight takes d5, instead of exchanging or instead of taking and then losing the bishop, I was going to play bishop goes to h6. Throw in the intermediate move, rook moves somewhere. Now I can take the knight. So actually, it's probably going to be here. Takes the queen. I recapture. Now you move. Let's maybe throw in this. Take the pawn. Oh gosh, this is just absolutely lights out. So my opponent didn't end up taking on d5. Instead, she played c4. And so again, I think at this point we can clearly see perhaps there's hope chess. Slash, my opponent also said that the longer the game goes on, the harder it is for her to calculate and visualize what's actually happening. That makes sense. And so again, like this pawn is clearly multiple attacked. But again, I'm trying to keep things simple. Like there's potential issues here. Again, discovered. Oh, if I could draw the arrow, potentially discovered attacks against my bishop. Also, whatever. I ended up simply taking that knight off. I now don't have a hanging bishop here anymore. Still a really crappy bishop just staring at the pawn chain. And then this lets me take the pawn. So I'm actually up 3 pawns at this point. My opponent plays queen goes to c4, double attacking my bishop. But after simply takes, queen goes to g4. Whoops. That is, I'm a piece. We played a few more moves, but the game's essentially over here. I'll just quickly show them. Rook goes to a7. I think this is a perfect example of my opponent's visualization calculations ability. She only had about 9 minutes left at this point. So simply, unfortunately, hangs the rook. I bring the knight in. I'm getting ready to do some checkmate. All my pieces come in. The only thing I have to be careful about is that my rook is hanging, and I very nearly just like hung my rook for nothing, but I was able to find a nice little checkmate at the end. Woo. So that's the game. And again, if you were to look at this, you'll notice that I was never really under any threat. I felt like I was in complete control. I don't think black was able to make a threat this entire game. With outside, like the g5, h5 is very easy to defuse. And so I think it's very easy, and I was very tempted to not analyze this game in any depth, to just sort of file it away and come back later. But there's actually a lot here. And so I'm curious if you want to sort of do this game for yourself. Up till now, take a look at um, if you did you agree with my explanations up until now? Were there any parts in which you said, "Oh, hold on, Smithy, what about this? Or what about that?" Or maybe you could look a little bit deeper. Um, so I think there are nuggets here. How about that? Let's go back. So let's see here. I'll just start from the beginning just so we know exactly what's happening. E4, D6, funny opening. I have absolutely no problems up until now. It might be interesting to just look at what would happen. Sorry, bishop e7, a4, if black had continued with the g5 plan, trying to push it. Um, it doesn't work very well. Why? Let's say I'm going to keep going with a5, and now what is black going to do? Again, the standard idea is to bring this knight over here, but it doesn't work. Whoops, you just dropped the pawn. So you have to find a way to reinforce the e-pawn before you can do this knight maneuver. How does black normally do that? It's with c6. Let's just say I keep going with b4. Queen goes to c7 because now the queen is guarding this. But it turns out even here it doesn't work. Because after takes, we can actually take with the knight because of the discover check. Or not discover check, the discovered attack on the queen. There's a really cool variation. If the queen accepts the knight, we've got knight d5. Sure, you can take the bishop, but this is actually checkmate because the d file is blocked. These sorts of common ideas. I'll be honest, I didn't see that during the game, but it's just it's nice to know. B6. Um, I ended up playing A5. The computer calls it, I think it's the second, maybe it's the third best move. I think it's perfectly fine. The computer suggests bishop goes to B5, which I think is a typical computer move, simply pinning the knight. And so the idea is if, let's just say, bishop goes to B7, well, now I can take on E5. Whoop, pinned. Now, sure, because of the knight. Woohoo, fantastic. Back up. All right, all right, all right. Well, what if after bishop goes to b7, d takes e5, maybe black recaptures this way? And now, again, computer variation, takes, throws in e6. Wow. Again, knight is pinned. And after f takes e6, rook e1, chasing that bishop away. And then we don't even cash in. We're going to cash in with the knight. Light squares are terribly weak. Wow. Fantastic computer move. Now it's funny because it actually makes a little bit of sense just because I remember a lesson that Igor Smirnov, GM Smirnov, made a long time ago. Basically, every time there's a pawn move, this is a permanent change to the position. It's a permanent change to the pawn structure. And we can see already, if you remember later on, I was mentioning how the g5 push weakened all the light squares because all of black's pawns are on dark squares. Well, that's exactly the true right now. Already, there are weaknesses on the light squares. And playing bishop goes to b5 attempts to immediately take advantage of that. So, maybe I can't calculate all the variations, but I can understand the idea here. At the same time, I'm not too worried that I just played a very simple, very natural, very logical move with a5. So c5, and then I played the only logical move d5. Right? I mean, I don't want to take this and just bring that knight to a really good square, right? I don't want to take this and just open the position up, right? It's interesting because that was my exact thought process. I don't want to take things up and just open the position up. But what's incredible is that if I had looked a little bit deeper, I might have seen the following. Okay, let's play a6. Why do we play a6? It just completely freezes the queen side. Look, this bishop, it has nowhere to go, right? It would want to go to b7. We're stopping it. Okay, a6. Let's say he castles. Knight goes to b5. And now, look at this. This pawn is now perpetually under attack. How do we defend that pawn? We have to keep the rook at home. We would love to play queen c7, but nope, that obviously loses the queen. And so now this knight is completely freezing this rook. Okay, what do you play as black? It's not so easy. Again, like this pawn is just completely poisoned. You're gonna lose something. Okay, maybe rook e8. Okay, we're gonna play queen e2. What do? If you ever move this knight, this pawn falls. This bishop has no square. If you can't move this knight, this bishop can't come to this diagonal. Queen has no squares. Well, maybe we move the bishop. Maybe we can like do something like this. Bishop out. Rook goes to d1, completely pinning. And black is in like a -3 or a +3 advantage for white Zugzwang type position. It's just absolutely terrible. Um, I If you ever try this whole G6 idea, it doesn't work because of the pin. And you can't like try and break the pin because you lose it. Like if black is in such a terrible, tight position, like you can't do anything. Absolutely incredible. Uh, that whole idea didn't cross my mind in the slightest. Something quite similar happens after knight takes e5, takes. Well, here we're able to ship in this a takes b6. Can't recapture because you lose the rook. All right. Exchanging queens obviously doesn't help. You still lose the rook. And so you're kind of stuck doing this. And now we have a nice open position in which black, look at these ugly pawns, really unhappy bishop. And I've got, again, let's see if I can draw the arrows better, huge, brilliant light squares. And also this bishop, where in the game didn't do very much besides take on a6, huge diagonal, pressuring f7. F4 is an idea, opening the F pile to get the rook into play. And this, I think, is a position. Well, the computer calls it like best play. So obviously it's pretty good for white. But also, I think this is a position where a lower rated player is going to very quickly make a mistake. Very easy to just cave under the pressure, I think. So fascinating. In this position, after c5, I had concluded very quickly that d5 um, was probably the best move. And if you remember my first over the board video, I mentioned a thought process error that I had where I looked at one variation, I didn't like it, and so I immediately played the other one. This is almost the inverse of that, in which I saw that d5 was a good move. And like, don't get me wrong, it is a good move. It's about zero point 0.9, like it's a very solid, very stable advantage. And because I saw it was a good move, I didn't bother to check if anything else was good. I didn't seriously consider any of this. Where if you would have given me 5 minutes and told me to actually analyze the position and find the best move, I would perhaps seriously consider some of these d takes e5s. And also, again, if we remember our opening principles, which hopefully we all do, black has now made a number of unnecessary pawn moves, not developed. I'm castled, he isn't, or she isn't. And so it makes sense to be opening the position rather than to close it down. So this position here, really big takeaway for me personally, is how I completely missed how powerful exchanging this was. I didn't even consider it beyond like a few token seconds. So there we go. D5, castles. Nothing wrong with here. A6, yeah, not very happy with this. Takes. H3, again, I mentioned my thought process. I'm fine. Here. One thing I kind of glazed over is how much time that I spent in this game trying to get knight goes to b5 to work. With the idea that after takes, I was going to play bishop goes to d2 and the queen is trapped. I mean, which is kind of true. There was always this pawn, which I honestly just missed, but there's also this, uh, which is pretty obviously bad. I'm down a piece. Sure, I might be able to. I win the rook back, so it's a rook for two, but then I lose this pawn. This pawn's perpetually weak. Terrible position. And I think I calculated this variation like 18 times. It was ridiculous how often I was trying to make this knight b5 idea work. And what's really interesting is that the other idea basically works. I never even considered the idea of using the opposite move. So sorry, the idea with both of these moves is just the only way the queen can get out is to retreat. If I can come in with b5, look, the rook is fully here, queen's here, the pawns are taking away all these squares. If I could draw the arrows better, there we go. And so all I need to do is attack this queen. And she's dead, right? Bishop b5 pairs the rook a4. Nothing. What do you do? Let's just, uh, give a random move. Bishop b7. Rook goes to a4. Um, take. Up a queen. But really, it's a queen for a rook and bishop. And what's funny is the computer only says this position is 0.9, which I thought was kind of funny. And after takes, it's only down to 0.5. So there's something about this position. Even though up, good chunk of material, a queen and a pawn for a rook and a bishop, um, for whatever reason, it's not a huge advantage. So again, fascinating. But again, for me, takeaway is that I spent so much time on a move that very clearly didn't work, and I knew that, and I just kept calculating it without considering, was there something else? So, kind of whoops. Again, so with getting out into that kind of thought process there, this one's a little bit different. This is more, again, tunnel visioning on a particular idea. Anyway, queen goes to b6, queen goes to b7 would have been a much better move, freeing the b6 square for the knight immediately, bring the knight to a better square, and then exchanging something. Anyway, queen goes right back to b6. I played bishop goes to e3. Computer says bishop d2 is better. I was focusing a little too much on this. Bring the knight goes to d2. I mean, it's also possible to bring it to d3. Come on, Jonathan. Like, it's not that hard. And then the idea with bishop goes to b2 is that the bishop can come here to a5, which is much better than it is on e3. Anyway, bishop e3, queen goes to aha, hold on. Elephant in the room takes b2. Now I was pretty proud of this. I thought rook goes to b1. Sure, you take my knight. Queen's completely trapped. Queen has no squares to go to, right? Well, it's interesting because one, it's somewhat similar. We can just imagine, a take situation. Material is technically equal. I got the queen, but he has the rook, the knight, and the pawn, so they both equal 9. But there's a much better move. Knight takes e4. Didn't consider this in the slightest bit. I actually can't take the queen. There's no way for me to move my queen and then defend the knight, so I'm actually going to just drop material. Now, fortunately, I do have, and I just completely missed this idea in the game. I saw up to here, queen trapped. I considered A, that I'm completely winning, when it's not. It's actually much messier than that. And two, after this, I have to find rook goes to A3. And now the computer shows, okay, watch what's going to happen here. Because if I ever take it, now they're like, we got these two pawns that are coming there, and uh, the knight could live forever on c3, potentially. We got f5. And black's got a surprising amount of play here, despite the strange material deficit. Really interesting. So I accurately calculated the position. I missed this last move. Sorry. I missed one more move. What's an aggressive move that my opponent can take? Knight takes e4, setting up the fork. And then I also really misevaluated it. I was perhaps too materialistic, thinking, aha, I'm getting up material. When, of course, if I were to actually do the material count, it's much closer than it should have been. So these are some really interesting errors sneaking into my thoughts. Fortunately, my opponent didn't go down this path. And then after here, it was, again, I already mentioned rook a3. It was fairly simple. Yeah, so there's not, I'm not going to fault myself too much for anything over here. In fact, I played more or less the top moves throughout. But it's these two earlier positions I really want to focus on, which are, again, the learning things for me, is after the c5 idea, is that, again, I saw a good move. I didn't stop to look for a better move. And I should have realized, or had I noticed how many pawn moves my opponent's was making, still hasn't castled, opening the position makes a lot of sense. Maybe I should look at the moves that open the position more before I close it down. And then two, okay, so there's some, oh, just quickly, so bishop d2 is a much simpler idea because now the pawn is very clearly poisoned. Uh, you're not winning. the extra knight, because again, when the bishop was here, this knight was free. When the bishop is here, obviously there's absolutely nothing. There's no safe squares. Game over. So that was the second reason that bishop d2 was a much better move. I was tunnel vision on this one maneuver too much when I shouldn't have, but really, um, I have to continue the calculation to the end of the forcing moves. There's one more forcing move my opponent can takes. And even if they don't, sort of the realization that material is equal, some faulty calculation here. So I need to make sure that I'm better um, in that respect. Keep calculating and evaluate more than just the material. This is what I'm taking away from this game, um, which will hopefully I will apply in my next game next week. But that's going to be it. Hopefully, again, you found this interesting, enjoyable, a peek behind my thought process and how I'm trying to improve from these games. So that's it. I'm going to stop that there. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye for now.